This video is a review of Chapter 3, Summarizing Functions. And in this chapter, it essentially describes what a statistical analysis is and provides a definition for that. And what's more, it talks about the most basic kind of analysis that you can perform, and that is a summary analysis, or using summary or descriptive statistics to be able to describe your data. Specifically, talking about its distribution, but there are other ways to summarize data as well. So let's take a look at a few ways. And of course, you're using statistical functions in spreadsheet software. So when we look at, for example, a variable comprised of numeric values, so in other words, what would be classified as a numbers variable in any sort of spreadsheet software, we're able to essentially use functions to be able to describe that data set. What is the minimum number? What is the maximum number? What is the average number? And so on and so forth. In order to do that, we simply press equals on a cell, really at any point, and we type the name of our function. In this case, we're going to first look at average. And inside our parentheses, we're going to select the range of cells that contain the values for which we'd like to determine the average. And so there you have it. The average in this case is 6,235. Now, these are the top 15 wrappers in terms of the largest vocabulary. So that's important to keep in mind that we are not looking at the entire population of wrappers. And if we did, that average would be somewhat lower, a couple thousand lower, I believe. So what else can we do? Well, instead of simply looking at the average, we can change the function name right in this formula bar, and it would be quite easy for us to be able to determine, say, the minimum or the maximum or some other function, since we already have that range selected. However, I am going to keep that the way it is, and we'll even label this as average. Move that close, and we'll make that bold. Cool. And so what about the median? And so the median is the value at the 50th percentile, or smack dab in the middle of the data. Now, since we have 15 different rap artists here, in other words, 15 divided by 2 is 7.5. So we can expect, and even though this is in row 8, it actually represents the 7th. So somewhere between here and here lies our median. How do we find that? Well, we use function median. And again, we'll select these values and press enter. And just as we suspected, between the 7th and 8th wrappers, Action Bronson and Del the Funky Homo Sapien, we have our median, which is not smack dab in the middle of it, but it's actually providing us the middle value. The reason that's happening is because there's an odd number of wrappers here. There are only 15 wrappers, and so it's giving us precisely the middle wrapper, which is Del the Funky Homo Sapien. However, if this were an even number of wrappers, then we would probably get, as the 50th percentile, we should get essentially the average of these two values, or the middle of that. So let's label that as the median. Cool. And so what about the minimum? So we can obviously look at this. We know that it's ordered from greatest to least. And so we can already recognize what is the maximum and what is the minimum. But that's not always the case, especially when your data aren't sorted. So let's go ahead and look at the maximum and minimum. And of course, we need to use a function to be able to determine that rather quickly. And we'll highlight our range. And there you have it. So the maximum is in fact 7,392. There you see it at the top with ASIP rock. And the roots are the minimum. So I'm actually just going to copy and paste this formula, put it in this cell, and I'm going to change max to min, finding the minimum value in this particular data set. And so, of course, that's the roots with 5,803 unique lyrics or words. So, cool. So we've looked at the average, the median, or the 50th percentile, the maximum and minimum values. So what you can imagine is kind of the 0th percentile and the 100th percentile, irrespectively, that is. So the 100th and 0th comprise the maximum and minimum. And what's more, we can also look at quartiles. Now, what are quartiles? Well, quartiles are the 25th, the 50th, and the 75th percentile. You can have different what are called quantiles, and so that can be every at the 5th percent, the 10th percent, the 15th percent, and so on and so forth. And some quantiles have specific names as well. So deciles, for example, would give you the 10%, 10th percent, the 20th percent, so on and so forth. In this case, we're just looking for the second quartile and the first quartile and the third quartile. In other words, the 25th percentile and the 75th percentile. So how do we find quartiles? Well, we use quartile, of course. And inside, we can see from this tooltip that it's telling us two different things that we need to put. Remember that a function is like an oven. So in this case, we're not only giving it the ingredients, which in this case is going to be B2 through B16, but we have to give it something else. And notice how this second, what's called an argument inside of a function, notice how that becomes highlighted after I create a comma. That's because that comma is essentially separating the first argument, which is an array or a range, and it's moving on to the second argument, in which case we have to name which quartile we want. So this is a universal function for finding the 0th quartile, which is in other words the minimum, and the 4th quartile, which is the maximum or the 100th percentile. So what are we interested in? Well, the first one. If we do that, the first quartile is 5,900, and so that's existing somewhere between Wu-Tang Clan and RZA. And so these quartiles are actually giving us kind of where that the 25th percentile would exist, and not really like median, returning a singular value. So that quartile exists between RZA again and Wu-Tang Clan. So that is the first quartile. And then the third quartile, remember, you can think of these as percentiles, and since 25% is a quarter of 100 or a quarter of 1, then 2 quarters would be 50 or the 50th percentile, which would be the second quartile, and 3 quarters or the third quartile would be equal to 75 out of 100 or the 75th percentile. So how do we find it? Once again, we give the function name, we choose the ingredients we're going to put in our function oven, and we're going to set the temperature of that oven to 3. That's an interesting way to phrase functions, but hopefully that helps you understand a little bit more that it's baking us a nice little data cake from the ingredients that we put inside of it. So, cool. That's pretty much everything that you need to know from this chapter, is that you learn these summarizing functions. And one thing to keep in mind is that these particular functions are comprise a 5-number summary. And so if we were to rearrange them, for example, let's say we did the first quartile, oh goodness, and then the third quartile, and then we did, of course, the minimum and maximum. This is the exact same thing that we just looked at in terms of this is the 0th quartile, the first quartile, the second quartile, or the median, the third quartile, and the fourth quartile, the max. These represent 0%, 25%, 50%, 75%, and 100%. And so for that reason, this is typically called the 5-number summary, and it helps you understand the distribution and the dispersion of your data. It's an excellent summary to quickly grasp how your data are distributed, and it helps you understand if there might be any sort of skew or something that might be unusual. This seems to be rather concentrated. Of course, we're looking at a sample that's some of the wrappers with some of the largest vocabularies of all time. And so it's just excellent for that use and excellent for summary statistics and the most basic form of statistical analysis that you can perform. So that all being said, there is a way to do shortcuts, and I'm going to go ahead and remove these rows. So you can do the same thing here by using the shortcuts up here for at least most functions. You can open up a function menu for these different kind of mostly summary statistics. In this case, we have count, which we didn't talk about. Count would just simply give us the number of observations, or 15. But you can also do sum, average, max, min, and then open that up to even more. So let's choose minimum. And it's guessing that we want to take the minimum of this particular column. But let's go ahead and do... Actually, you know what? Scratch that. Let's take the minimum of this particular column. And we'll do the 5-number summary with shortcuts for this. So here it's minimum, and if we wanted first quartile, well, that's not here, so we can skip that just for the sake of brevity, but you can find that in, again, more functions. Average is also not there, but we can do max, so let's take a look at that. Oh, I'm sorry, median is not there. But, you know, just for the sake of whatever, let's throw that in there. And there you have a 3 out of 5 number summary, which helps you understand the dispersion of these particular values. So that's it in a nutshell. It's rather easy to do. I hope you found this helpful, and welcome to your first use of summary statistical functions in spreadsheet software if you haven't used them already. They actually get pretty fun.